Welcome, and thank you for joining today's conference, Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting 101. Before we begin, please ensure that you've opened up the WebEx chat panel by using the associated icon on the bottom right corner of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. If you would like to use closed captions, please click on the closed caption icon in the bottom left corner of WebEx. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Eric Chatham, consultant. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Marvin, for the introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for the Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting 101 for CPF Grantees. Next slide, please. Today we'll be covering DRGR overview, helping grantees become familiar with the system. Again, this will be 101. Additional training and materials will be available, and certainly additional technical assistance will be available as you and your organization advance through this process. Undoubtedly, there will be additional questions, and TA will be available at those times. We'll go through the various modules as they're referred to by HUD, specifically starting with the administration and helping you get your accounts set up to have various users within your organization having access to the system. We will review the action plan process and functionality for submitting that action plan. I know many of you are eager to get that action plan approved, which once you have the action plan approved, allows you to begin accessing those funds through the drawdown module. And so we'll be going over how to obligate and draw down your funds from your line of credit using the DRGR system. Probably already familiar that you'll have biannual reporting with HUD. We'll go over how those reports are submitted through this system, as well as reports out on your financials and your beneficiaries and other outcomes of your programs in the reports module here within DRGR. Finally, at the conclusion of our presentation, we will share additional resources. Of course, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the HUD Exchange, and I'll share with you several other resources as well as additional training and technical assistance opportunities available for you and your staff. Next slide, please. So to begin, we will go over the DRGR overview. Next slide. So the Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting System, or DRGR, was established for special appropriations such as disaster grants, but has since been extended to include other special purpose programs and appropriations, now including the CPF grants, of course. Within DRGR, you will establish an action plan or a template that details budgets and performance goals for your various activity types directly managed by your grantee or any subrecipient partners. Grantees will have to set performance goals for each activity and measure those performance goals, which will be reported in those biannual reports. HUD will review your action plan, and once approved, will unblock the grant, making it available to draw through the line of credit control system, or LOCS. Any change to your action plan will require HUD approval, and grantees will use the drawdown function by creating vouchers for each activity, again, to create wire transfer or ACH payments to access those funds directly. Grantees will use this same system to submit performance reports using the structure established in the DRGR action plans. And we'll go over each of these modules momentarily. Next slide, please. So here's a basic flow chart of how the DRGR system works. If you start at the top here with the admin module and go around to the right, the first thing we'll need to do is create and add users to the system. As you set up your grant agreement in your SF-424s with HUD, you will be established at least one user, which will at least initially be established as your local administrator. And then I'll go through momentarily how you can add additional users and provide user permissions for additional staff. The DRGR system, as you log in, goes directly to a home page where HUD will post updates and news. Any new versions or system changes to the DRGR system will be made available on the home screen. And so I advise you to take a look at that, certainly on your first couple of times logging in, but as updates are made to the software, be mindful to read and review those system changes. Your first big step in DRGR will be this action plan, which is essentially a reproduction of your grant application, where you'll describe your program, your budgets, your outcomes, and your expected timelines. We'll go through the details of that action plan. Again, the action plan will be submitted for HUD approval, and you'll work directly with your HUD contact to have that plan reviewed and approved. And once the plan is approved by HUD, it will initiate populating the grant and actually having the funds available through this DRGR system. You'll use the drawdown module to obligate funds to specific activities, and then you will create and approve vouchers or drawdowns, again, which create and initiate ACH overnight payments through the line of credit control system. You'll have your performance reports where you'll summarize your drawdowns, your expenditures and obligations, as well as accomplishments for the various reporting periods. And those will be submitted to HUD through the DRGR system and have to be approved. Finally, again, there is a reports module or a data analytics module where you can review your financial performance and account information in easily to read exportable reports. Next slide, please. On the right-hand side, you see sort of a screenshot of the login page for the DRGR portal. The left-hand side, we have the current logins. You want to make sure you're always using this correct login. There's other systems for HUD that look very similar. You want to make sure you are accessing DRGR. And we provided the current link to the user manual. All of these resources are going to be made available on the HUD Exchange. You can see on the web link to the left, that initial address is hudexchange.info. We're going to be providing multiple links throughout the presentation back to the HUD Exchange. So all information is held there. So as with all online databases that we're all familiar with these days, you'll have a username and password. You'll agree to the terms of service, and I again encourage each of you to review those rules and terms of service, at least on that first time. Make sure you understand the implications of using this system. Some of you will have access to transfer quite a lot of money overnight, and you want to make sure you understand what you're signing up for, both as an organization and personally. So review those terms of service. Each time you'll click that I agree and then log in from there. Next slide, please. We've got sort of multiple screenshots here on this on this slide, but the top half of your screen will be the home screen, if you will, where it says manage my grants. And you see in that blue bar across the top of the screenshot, you've got various different modules with little icons on the top right. This is where you'll access the different functionalities. And so we're going to start with the first three modules. The manage my financials is, of course, using the $. The manage my grants as that sort of 3-column government building, if you will. The administration module, which has the crown icon. And finally, the manage my compliance, which we won't review too much in today's session, but there'll be follow-up, and that's where there's the little scale icon. So today we're going to look at the administration, the managing my grants, and managing my financials primarily. with a little bit more on the reports. Next slide, please. So let's start out in that administrative module. Next slide. So to begin with, in that user module, you will need to request new users. So again, initially, you will have assigned one user that will be at least, again, initially identified as your local administrator. That individual should receive login credentials directly from HUD upon approval of your grant agreement and the initial SF-424. The individual listed on that SF-424 is going to be the default individual for getting this initial access. You'll utilize that staff person's login credentials to access DRGR the first time, at which point through the administration module, you can begin to request new users. And so you will request new user for DRGR, and likely you will not have access to either of HUD's similar systems, IDIS or DRGR. So you see there circled in red, no or unknown, unable to find, meaning you do not have a username already. So no access previously, so you're setting up a new user. The right-hand side then, when you select that no and hit search, this window will pop up where you'll fill in the information for that new user. Fairly straightforward: name and organization, contact information, etc. You'll also create a PIN. This will be really important for the users to write down. Should you ever get locked out or need to reset your password, you'll need that 5-digit PIN to call in to have your password reset. So each user should create their own PIN and recall this PIN for future use. Next slide, please. Again, within this user management, as you're setting up these new users, you'll want to assign roles and responsibilities for each staff person. And so we've got a couple screenshots here shared on the screen. First off, in the grantee profile at the bottom, you can establish an individual to be a view only, where they can just see the system but can't actually make any changes. You can reassign that local administrator or grantee administrator role once you get new people added. You see highlighted in red here, request drawdown and approved drawdown. Each drawdown will require 2 people, one to request or set it up, and another to approve, which will actually initiate the drawdown. So you'll need at a minimum 2 users for DRGR so that you can complete the drawdown process. There's not necessarily a limit to the number of users, but again, a minimum of 2 so that you can create this drawdown. And each user could only have one or the other of these functionalities, either the request or the approve, but not both. Then you have other options, for example, submitting action plan, submitting the performance reports, requesting new users, and submitting the voucher documents to HUD. You'll also have submenu options here, and I'll go through this momentarily, but as you add each user, you'll need to associate each user to your particular grant. And I realize for most of us on the call, you only have one grant, but as this program proceeds, you may have multiple grants over multiple years. And in each case, each grant will be set up separately in DRGR, and each user then needs to be associated with those grants. Users have to also be continuously certified to remain active and remain connected to your organization and to the particular grants. So I'll show you a screenshot to recertify grantees. Again, here in this admin module with the crown, you've got these various options. Next slide, please. So here's that certification process. As part of the account request process, other HUD or grantee admin users will certify the need for the user to access the system. So again, you've submitted new user request. Those new users have been added and been given a user ID, and you as the admin for your grant and for your organization will certify each user. Users have to be recertified each 6 months. If this does not occur, users will not have access to DRGR at all. Grantee administrators can use this screen to remove staff access if they no longer work at the grantee or on these particular funds. And they can also submit a separate deactivation request for the user profile. Again, if staff may have left your organization or no longer need access. So in that admin module that we saw on the previous screen, one of the submenu is certified grantee users. You see sort of in the middle of this slide is a list of all of the users. You'll then use the button in the middle to either certify or decertify, moving left or right. So you have certified users, and then on the right-hand side, users with expiring certification. So you want to recertify those users. Bottom right of your screen, you can see users that are inactivated due to expiring certifications. So that admin person would need to activate the user and then certify them as well. So again, that user admin or that grantee admin staff person is going to be responsible for doing this. Again, every 6 months, all users have to be confirmed to be both active and certified for each grant. Next slide, please. Once they're certified, you can associate users to each grant, and here's just a sort of a zoom in again of that submenu in the administration. Associate users to grants. You've got available users, and you'll assign them to the grant and certify them as well. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you a little bit more later in the presentation, the data analytics module. It sort of looks like that little pie chart. You'll have the ability to run reports. This is one of the many reports that you'll have access, A42, which corresponds to administrative report number 42. But this just showing you, for example, all of the users associated with your grant, their status, their roles, their certification process, and who last certified them and their last certification date. We'll also show you a little bit later both financial and performance reports available in this data analytics module, but just wanted to show you really quickly. Here's a quick snapshot of all the users for the particular grant. Might be helpful in the admin module. Next slide, please. So let's review this big action plan. I know this is a looming step for all of you and probably why you tuned in today. Next slide, please. So using your grant agreement, your original grant application documents, you'll prep the action plan in the DRGR system. You'll submit it to HUD and await your HUD reps review. They will either reject and request some modifications, or eventually it will be submitted in and approved. You will have a status at that point of reviewed and approved. Your action plan must be in a reviewed and approved status for you to be able to submit your performance reports. But you'll also have to resubmit your action plan should you add or delete activities or change budgets for projects and activities. So be mindful of your timing of the action plan changes. That if you've got a performance report coming up, you may want to wait until after that performance report has been submitted before you make modifications to your action plan. So let's take a look at these systems. Next slide, please. So the key components of the DRGR action plan. First, we're going to, in DRGR, add an action plan. We're going to confirm our grant number. We're going to provide some overall narratives. And if your program anticipates generating revenue or program income, you'll add that to your budget. In DRGR, projects are used to group activities. And if the project matches the budget line items from a grant, the performance reports will roll up these budgets and spending by these projects so they can be compared against the application. Generally speaking, projects are synonymous with eligible use categories. So perhaps you have administration, you have acquisition, you have construction, maybe you have public services, and those are projects, and then activities are a little more detailed, and we'll get to those momentarily. So you'll add the action plan, you'll add your high-level projects and programs, and then you'll add specific activities. Activities will have specific outcome, key characteristics, meeting outcome objectives. Activities will then have budgets, and this is you will draw down funds at the activity level. Next slide, please. So here's a screenshot of how to begin to add that action plan. You'll use that 3-column building icon at the top right of the DRGR screen. When you click that down arrow, the submenu populates for Manage My Grants. You can see across the screen here, you have your action plan submenu on the left, projects, activities, programs, performance reports, and finally grants with a grant closeout. So our first step here is under that action plan submenu on the far left to add an action plan. When you click that button, the screen here in the middle, add action plan will populate. These figures should auto populate, but you want to double check that you've got the right fiscal year appropriation. You've got the grant number that corresponds with your grant agreement. Of course, the correct grant amount. Your grant status will be active. And then the grant description is a grant number that's specific to you, to your organization. Again, that should be identified in your grant agreement as well. If all those numbers check out, you'll hit that blue confirm grant, and it'll populate the next screen. If those figures do not check, do not correspond to your grant agreement, you would immediately want to contact your rep and double check the entry in the DRGR system before proceeding too much further. So assuming we have this all correct, we're going to hit that blue confirm grant button and start preparing the action plan. Next slide, please. Once you're in this action plan, here's sort of your home screen for the action plan. You've got the summary at the top with the grant number and your grantee name. Your action plan status at this point will be our original in progress. You see on the top right, the LOCS authorized amount, that LOCCS. That's the line of credit control system. That is where Treasury literally has your funding held. And at this moment, your LOCS authorized amount is 0. Once the grant action plan is approved, HUD will release that block and your authorized amount will match your grant award amount. Some of you might have programs that are generating revenue or program income. You'll want to include the anticipation of that revenue as part of your action plan budget process. You can see that on the top right there, there's a little icon to edit. The first thing you'll do is provide an overall narrative. And you can see in this, in the middle of the screen, you have multiple tabs. So we'll start with the narratives at the highest level of the overall grant and projects. You'll be able to add or upload supporting documentation. And then we'll go through the financials, the outcome measures, projects, and activities. Next slide, please. So the first step then is once we have the overall grant narrative populated, we'll add projects. So again, in that Manage My Grants icon, you'll now use the submenu Project and add a project. Screenshot on the right-hand side gives you a quick scenario. The project number, this is just a numbering system that you will generate, something that makes sense for you and will correspond with your external financial management system. So you can use similar coding, whether you're using QuickBooks or something more sophisticated. You can have cross references in these project numbers. Project title, and I'll go through some examples of project titles, but again, this should be synonymous with eligible use categories. So the example we have here is just simply the administration, and you'll provide a basic description in the narrative box. The project designation is just a drop-down menu. We'll show you some screenshots of that momentarily. Project status, at least at the initial, will be open. Eventually, you'll begin to close and complete activities and projects as you prepare for grant closeout, but initially, all projects would be open. Your project effective date and your project end date should match your grant agreement for your period of performance for these particular grants. That being said, you may have projects where some of you are doing acquisition of sites. So maybe the acquisition is to occur in the first 6 months, then construction from month 7 to 18, for example, and then occupancy for those of you doing residential or otherwise facilities, maybe phase 3 longer term. So you can use those project effective start and end dates to correspond with your project timeline. Again, not everyone has this, similar funding programs, so this is different or unique for each jurisdiction or grantee. You'll set up a budget out of the available project budget, which initially is the full grant. You'll start carving away the budget for each project. You have to start here with the project budget, and then the activity budgets will fall under each project. So you'll see as we begin to add more and more projects, that available budget will begin to diminish. As you've completed the setup for each project, on the bottom right of your screen, you see a blue icon to save the project. Next slide, please. Within each project, then, you'll need to add a little more details from that initial setup. So the first thing will be to add a narrative project description. You've got standard formatting options here. You've got hyperlink, fairly straightforward here, narrative information on the project. This should match your grant application, so there's no need to necessarily reinvent what you've already created. This could largely be a copy and paste from your original grant materials. And then you'll hit save in the bottom right again. And next slide, please. Each project will need a responsible organization. It's likely that your organization is the responsible organization for all activities and projects, but I've come across some projects that have both local city or counties involved with nonprofits and multiple nonprofits involved. Some of you are parent organizations that are nationwide organizations, and then there might be projects with your local affiliates. So each project needs to identify the responsible organization. You'll add responsible organizations back in the administration module. You can see again here in that little icon with the crown under the grantee submenu, there's add responsible organization. Likely, at least initially, they're not here, and so you'll search and come up with no results. So you'll have to add a new responsible organization. Left-hand screen, pretty straightforward, adding the additional information for each organization. You'll need that UEI, and I'm sure hopefully by now, everyone is familiar with the SAM.gov registration. You can look them up on the bottom right, as well as then access their UEI from that SAM lookup. You get their address and name and contact information. And again, their status, at least initially, everybody's status would be active. So you've added new responsible organizations. You won't have to do this again, but you'll have to do this at least in this initial action plan, presuming most of your organizations are new to these programs and are not yet available in DRGR. Next slide, please. Once they've been added, you can come back to that administration module. Let's say you need to update their DUNS number or UEI. Maybe you need to update the contact information, etc. You can always come back to that administration and then the grantee submenu to manage responsible organizations. The screenshot here, we've just essentially searched for all responsible organizations associated with your project. And then on the right-hand side in these listings, you see a little blue icon under action. That's where you'd be able to edit their particular details in the setup. Again, everybody's going to need that UEI and SAM registration to participate. So ultimately, that would have to be filled in for everyone. Next slide, please. So once we've got our project set up with our narrative, our budget, and our responsible organization, then we're ready to take the next step and add activities. Again, we're in that Manage My Grants module, now in the Activities sub-menu. We'll add an activity, and it'll populate this initial screen, very similar to the project screen. So now we'll associate this activity with the project. We're sticking with the administration as an example here. We have the activity type, your environmental review or assessment level of review. Hopefully all of you have attended those environmental review trainings. A side note, if not, they're all available on the HUD Exchange. I really encourage you to review those quickly. You'll select the national objective, which is just your CPF grant type. Your activity number. Now, again, this is corresponding, so you're already in the admin project. And you may only have one activity. Certainly under admin, maybe you're only covering your own organization's direct staff cost. But maybe you have other professional services that you want to include. So under the admin project, maybe you have multiple activities, one for grantee staff, maybe one for consultant staff, maybe one for your accounting or your architect, etc. That might be being paid out of admin. These categories are up to you. There's quite a bit of flexibility here. And the numbering system and naming conventions are also left up to each of the grantees. As you scroll down in the details setup, the screenshot on the right-hand side sort of shows you the details. Now we have an activity description, which is, again, just a straightforward narrative. The activity status, initially, again, all activities are active or underway. You have your projected start and end date for each activity. These at a minimum would need to correspond with the associated project, but perhaps they're smaller components. Maybe you only have a consultant for the initial phase, and then this consultant admin activity would be completed after the first 3 months, just as an example. You'll select again that responsible organization for this particular activity. And then out of that project budget, you're now going to add an activity budget. So our example here, we only had one admin project, one corresponding admin activity. So we're using that full budget. You may, again, have multiple activities associated with one project. So the cumulative, if you will, budgets for all of the activities cannot exceed the budget for that overarching project. You see in the bottom screen there in the budget, the adjust project budget. You typically want to say no. You want to just start in the system where, or the process we're identifying. Start with your project budget, and then using that money, allocate it to the activities. You don't want to go backwards, which is what this would allow you to do. Add the activity budget and then force it to also change the project. That causes a lot of math errors. So we just recommend always sticking with project first, then associated activities, and always select no to adjusting the project budget. Once your activity is set up, again, continue to make sure you hit save on all your screens here. Bottom right, blue icon, save activity. Next slide, please. The next several screenshots just show you sort of sampling for CPF grantees. The activity category on the left-hand side, that could be synonymous with your projects. You don't necessarily have to do this, but this is sort of best practice and standards. So for example, you have the admin that we just reviewed. Some of you are doing economic development. Some of you are doing housing. Not all of you, but many of you have acquisition to then do economic development, or then do housing and infrastructure or other public facilities. So the activity category might be appropriate for your projects. And then you have a bunch of different options for activity types within that. And so that might be those activity names as well, with specific identifiers for the name of the community center or the name of the housing development, for example. Next slide, please. Here's just a few more on the public services as well. So each of these different types of activities will then populate different types of performance measures. That sounds pretty obvious as I say that out loud. You're doing a housing program, you're probably going to have to report on housing units and households. You're doing a public service program, you're probably going to report on the beneficiaries. So as you set up those activities and select the activity type, that's also pre-populating, if you will, the outcome measures and accomplishment report parameters. Next slide, please. So once we've selected those activity types, back in the Manage Activity icon, we're going to add the performance or outcome measures. Our options here in the drop-down menus that are highlighted in that red cell are based on the type of activity we selected. So in this particular example, I know it's kind of hard to see there, but this is a direct benefit for household, where owner household, and the outcome, this second metrics is the number of units of single family or multifamily housing. So again, that will change based on the activity type. So you want to select your outcome metric first, and then hit save. And then next slide, please. Once you've selected your metrics, you're actually going to include proposed accomplishment numbers for each of the types. And so we're just showing you a sampling of the performance measures. You'll see on here, this is related to the sampling is related to homeless shelters. And so we're showing the number of beds, number of facilities, homeless persons assisted. But also, I want to point out and draw your attention to, you'll also report on Section 3 labor hours. I've got a slide a little later that describes Section 3, but I also want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to sign up for the Section 3 training webinar that will be on June 21st. I'll provide a link a little later. I won't go into too much detail about Section 3 labor hours, but in this session, but you will report those at each activity level where it's triggered in the action plan, and then also in your biannual performance reports. Next slide, please. So here's just a screenshot, clean screenshot, if you will, of the performance metrics. Along the right-hand side, as you need to edit these, you can see the edit icon where you will add the number, a proposed number throughout. When you get down to the beneficiary level, the household or individual level, you'll also be reporting on the income status. And so you see low or moderate income options here as well. Next slide, please. So should you set this up in already we've HUD had seen some action plans that needed performance metrics modified or updated, and so just want to show you that you can edit here each of these, and you can come back all the way to the metric and revise the proposed accomplishments. If you do this after the initial approval of your action plan, that would be considered amendment or a modification to your action plan, which will trigger a resubmission. So in your original grant proposal and agreement, maybe you said you're going to do 25 housing units. You start doing the financials and you start getting bids and you realize, hey, we're only going to be able to do 20. And maybe you want to modify this action plan. You can of course do that. That's going to trigger resubmitting the action plan for HUD approval. So just wanted to point out that it's available to edit, but be mindful of the timing and then triggering HUD reapproval. Next slide, please. So just sort of backing out to the activity screen. Once you've added all of your activities, again, in that icon with the 3-column government building, if you will, the activities submenu, you can add or search activities. And then we've just shown you sort of 2 screenshots here. At the top is your search function. This may or may not be too terribly helpful for some of you. You're only going to have 2 or 3 activities, so there's not going to be a need to narrow down the search capabilities, but the functionality is here to search by grant, by activity title, by responsible organizations. Some of you may be running really large programs with lots of partners involved. It might be helpful to separate those out. You'll have that search capability, but just here's sort of that screenshot showing you all of the activities, how they're set up. And in this initial action plan, until it's submitted, you have the actions icon on the far right in blue, where it is essentially the little edit icon. Next slide, please. So now here's just a screenshot of example activity setup. So working left to right, if you will, our activity numbering system, title and type, and then our activity status. Most of them will be underway. Again, some of them could be planned if they're multiple phases. You're only in acquisition now, so redevelopment is only planned for months out. Eventually, you'll start having activities that are completed. You'll have that responsible organization. You'll have your total budget, which is again from the action plan. And then the obligation. The obligation we'll do in the financial module. I'll show you that momentarily, as well as the disbursements. You'll see throughout the presentation in DRGR, there's a difference between dispersed funds and total expended. Many of you will be utilizing your own funds or construction line of credits to pay for expenses as they incur, and then you'll be reimbursing yourself periodically. While it's not required to do reimbursement, that's generally how many jurisdictions and grantees will handle this. So it's often the case where your organization's actually expended more than you've drawn down and reimbursed yourself. And so in your performance reports, you'll always report on what you've actually spent, and the system will auto-populate what you've actually dispersed. You'll provide a narrative explaining any delta or difference there in this performance reports, and I'll show you that again momentarily. The system's going to track, of course, the percentage of funds that were budgeted and obligated that have been dispersed, and then, of course, the funding available yet to draw. Next slide, please. Back in the Manage Action Plan, you have an opportunity to upload various documents. And so you can upload CSV files if you need to. You can also upload PDFs for various supporting documentation that you might have, studies, designs, blueprints, whatever that might be to support your action plan. Any information you want to continue to share with HUD, you can upload. There's also an ability to upload CSV files to populate some of these narratives. Some of you may become really sophisticated and really good at this system. On the HUD Exchange, you can find CSV templates where you can populate all your budgets and your outcomes and then upload the CSV file to populate these different cells throughout the action plan. For the moment, I wouldn't worry myself with those, but as you become more familiar with the system and more sophisticated with the system, some of you might find that helpful. So just quick here, and pretty straightforward process for selecting your document from your computer server and uploading through these buttons here. Next slide, please. So once you're finally ready to submit the action plan, you'll be back in that Manage Action Plan main screen. And then so we've got a couple overlaying screenshots you can see here, but on the top right, you got the Submit Plan with 2 green check marks. When you're ready, you'll hit that Submit Plan. What that button will then do is prompt you first to submit an action plan for review. This top screenshot where there's submission comments. So you can submit and basically type out a little note to your HUD rep about the submission that you're ready. If he or she is asked for edits and then you're resubmitting, you would want to put confirmation that you've made the requested modifications, budgets, outcomes, etc. have been updated and revised. And then you'll hit the green submit button again. Once you do that, it will create automatically an email from your user ID directly to your HUD rep that's assigned to you. System already knows this, and that message will populate here. You can add other individuals to be notified that the action plan has been submitted. Pretty straightforward in the to or the carbon copy CC icons, just adding emails. And then that bottom screenshot there with that's just a quick screenshot from an email platform confirming. So you'll all receive an email confirming the action plan has been submitted. Particularly your HUD rep's going to receive this, so he or she can access and hopefully review and approve your plan. Next slide, please. Once that plan's been approved, you can come back in into the Manage My Grants. Forgive us, the red circle is around the wrong icon. Should be around that 3 column, but Manage My Grants, and then you can at this point view or search your action plan. You don't want to modify it again. You don't want to manage it because you're waiting on HUD to approve it. But here's that screenshot to where you can come back and search or download Word or PDF versions of your action plan. Next slide, please. Here's just a zoom in, if you will, of that email confirmation. And of course, that'll prompt you to send that email. Next slide, please. Eventually, your action plan will be reviewed and approved. The DRGR system should prompt an email to you automatically when your HUD rep changes the status. If they change it to rejected waiting modification, then that email should correspond with an email instructing the required modifications. Once you're in the reviewed and approved process, a few days later, that LOCKSS authorized amount will also populate typically to match your grant award. Next slide, please. You can download the grant action plan, again, through that Manage My Grants module. You can view it and download. You want to be mindful not to hit Manage Action Plan, because that's triggering making modifications either at the action plan, project, or activity level. So once it's reviewed and approved in your ongoing work, you likely just want to make sure you're either just viewing or downloading. When you do so, it'll download, and the screenshot in the middle of the screen is a PDF version of that action plan. So this is what it'll look like. I encourage you all to download and have a PDF version available for review, external from DRGR. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get to the drawdown module. Once your action plan is reviewed and approved, the LOCKS account is populated and authorized, you will be able to do drawdowns. Drawdowns, again, require 2 users, one to create the voucher or drawdown, and one to approve. So let's look at those systems and processes. Next slide, please. So the first thing in the drawdown process is to actually come back in the financial module and obligate the funds. So you've budgeted the funds in the action plan, you'll obligate officially in the financial section, which then allows you to create the drawdown and approve the drawdown. Your grant agreement should indicate thresholds for individual drawdowns as well as daily drawdown limits. So you might want to check that grant agreement for those thresholds. Certainly those of you that have big acquisitions, you may need to coordinate with HUD. If your voucher it needs to, or your daily limit needs to exceed your limit, you want to coordinate with your rep to make sure that that occurs. If the voucher is within your threshold and your limitations, then it should submit overnight and funds should be transferred to your organization's banking account within the next day. In the drawdown module, you can also revise, reject, or even cancel vouchers that perhaps have been set up incorrectly. Next slide, please. So let's see the options here. In the top right, in the modules, again, you're using that dollar icon to manage my financials. And let's start with search or edit obligations. When you hit that button, you'll come to the activity obligation screen, and you'll simply want to search for your activities. Once you hit search, your available activities will populate here at the bottom of your screen. And then for whichever activity you're ready to obligate, and maybe that first time you're ready to obligate all of the activities. So you'll go through one by one on the right-hand side under the action menu and maintain the obligation for the particular activity. Next slide, please. Within the activity obligation, you're going to be able to see the total budget, which is again from that action plan, and the amount available for obligation. So in the bottom right hand of your screen, you see initially all of it would be available to obligate. And so you would add whatever amount up to the full budget amount you're ready to obligate, and then save. Once you've drawn the funds, then the funds can't be de-obligated from this activity. But until you create those vouchers, you could de-obligate and revise your budgets as necessary. Next slide, please. Once the funds are obligated, you'll be ready to create the voucher. Again, in the Manage My Financials module, in the Drawdown submenu, you'll create a voucher. The first screen is you'll select the activities to create a voucher for. You can do many at once, and you'll have multiple line items in the voucher, and all the money can transfer at once, or you can do individual activities. So you'll select the activities that you want to add, and then hit continue. Next slide, please. You'll notice at the top of the screen in the Create Voucher screens, there are 4 screens. We're now on page 2 of 4. You're on this screen, it's showing you, it begins to auto-populate the voucher number. Voucher created for, that's going to be the responsible entity associated with the activity. Their requested submission date, typically you're using the default date of the day you're creating the voucher. And it's going to give the ID number for the individual that created the activity, or created the voucher rather. The bottom screen then shows you the activities that were selected for this voucher. On the right-hand side, it shows you the amount available in blue, and then the drawdown amount is amount up to the available amount. And so you'll manually enter the drawdown amount and then hit continue. Next slide, please. So page 3 of 4 is confirming the voucher. So this is giving you another quick screenshot before you finalize, making sure that all of the activities are correct, the drawdown amounts are correct, and then you will hit confirm voucher either at the bottom or top left. Next slide, please. Slide 4 of 4 is simply a confirmation. Many users will want to download a PDF so that you can then perhaps walk across the hall or email your counterpart that's ready to approve them. And so you'll keep this screenshot for your records. So at this point, you see the total voucher dollar requested, all the line item details here for each voucher activity. And again, that voucher number and the submission date. So it's certainly a best practice to download this PDF and save this to notify your counterpart. Next slide, please. So that second voucher process then is the approval. A different user now has to come in with the appropriate user permissions, come into the Manage My Financials module, and in the drawdown submenu, search and maintain vouchers. You can simply hit search vouchers and you can look for different statuses, but all of these would, in this case, with the line item status is open. They're waiting for approval. So you can search voucher for line item status open. It'll show you, like the screenshot now shows you. You can select all or you can select just one, and then on the far right, you approve. So this process is very straightforward, but the second user, that it's supposed to be an internal control and a checks and balances here. Some of you were with me last month when we did 2 CFR 200, and we discussed a lot about internal controls. You want to make sure your policy and procedures here have some responsibility for this second user, not to just come in and select approve for everything, but really take this opportunity to double check all of the details, all of the figures, and make sure this is actually what you want to transfer. Once you've done that, that second individual, again, selects all the line items along the left side and then approves under the action module or action menu on the far right. Next slide, please. So let's talk about both your performance reporting and the reports module briefly. Next slide, please. So you have semi-annual performance reports that you'll submit in the Manage My Grants module, right along with the action plan. You generally only have to report on activities that have had some action during the reporting period, whether you've had expenditures or drawdowns, or you've actually started to have performance outcomes. If there's no activity, you do not have to provide specifics on the activity. So if there's some activity that's only planned, again, you're doing acquisition and then redevelopment many months out, those planned activities don't need a narrative update every report. If it has not yet started, you do not need to report on them. But you must at least provide an overall progress narrative for each report. So some of you may still be in the planning processes, so maybe in procurement process, etc. So you would provide an overall progress narrative, and that might be it for the first time. Then as you start having drawdowns at the activity level, you'll need both progress narrative overall and activity progress reports. You'll use this semi-annual performance report to add the accomplishments and beneficiaries, again, based on how we set it up. And you'll also report on the financials. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, you may have expenditures that are outpacing, if you will, the drawdowns. If that's the case, you want to provide a narrative to explain why you have not yet drawn down to reimburse your organization. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick snapshot of where the performance report is auto-populating a lot of the data. So the action plan is providing all the basics for the project and activity name and number, the budgets and the descriptions, the activity types and the performance goals or the anticipated outcomes. The drawdown module is of course showing obligations and drawdowns that have been completed. And then this performance report is where you're going to add narratives and actual beneficiaries. So this is the only part that is a manual entry. Next slide, please. So here's the screenshot of how to get that set up. Again, in Manage My Report or Manage My Grants, you'll see all the submenus. You'll have Performance Reports, and you'll hit Manage Performance Reports. Once that populates in the bottom half of our screen here, the quarterly reports, or I'm sorry, the semi-annual reports that should auto-populate the next one due. So at the bottom here, you see an example of that report that was for second half of 2022 that was due back in January. That list of reports by reporting period should populate here. And then on the right-hand side, you'll take the action to edit the performance report. Next slide, please. So you'll do your overall progress narrative, and then you'll come into the activities and begin to populate narratives and outcome measures at the activity level. Next slide, please. So in the activities, at the top half of your screen, you're just searching for activities. Again, some of you may have just a few activities and it's fairly simple to find them. Others, just showing you the search functionality. So here's all of our activities listed for this particular example on the bottom right. And we're, again, only going to edit those that had some sort of movement, if you will, in that reporting period, whether we had drawdowns, had expenditures, maybe we have started accomplishments. But for those that are planned, for example, there's nothing to report on those necessarily. Now, and that's not to say you can't come in and add a narrative to let your HUD rep know where you are in the planning stage, but it's not required. Those that are underway and have drawdowns and have accomplishments, you're required to provide an update in each of these semi-annual reports. Next slide, please. So in the narrative, just like in our action plan setup, this functionality is very similar here now in the performance report. So we're going to use those tabs to provide a narrative, and we're going to now provide a progress for the last 6 months and hit save. Next slide, please. We'll go to the financials, and again, a lot of this is pre-populated. The budgets, the obligations, and the total funds drawn, all of that is pre-populated. The only thing that you're going to manually add here is the total funds expended. The total funds expended should be pretty well in line with the total drawdowns, but if it's not matching, then in that narrative section, you want to explain perhaps you have drawn down funds in advance and are about to release those funds within the coming days to your contractors, or you do reimbursement. So you've had expenditures and you only draw down at the end of each month. And so you have drawdowns pending. By the time you submit this report, perhaps they would have been submitted. So you just want to make sure you're explaining any differences between the funds expended and the funds drawn. You do see that there's a running total for this reporting period, so that's 6 months, as well as to date throughout your grant performance period. Next slide, please. Then you'll move to the measures or accomplishment measures tab, and you'll add your accomplishments. Again, this is pre-populated for the performance measure and the projected outcome based on your action plan. So you will edit and add manually the accomplishments into each category for the reporting period. And then it should auto update the to date to be a cumulative, but you'll want to just double check that the to date is running total. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick screenshot then of the funds expended, where that cell would be modified. You see the edit button down there at the total funds expended. And then once you hit that edit button, the smaller window pops up and you would manually enter the expenditures for this reporting period and hit save. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick screenshot overall of the beneficiaries. Please keep in mind all of your performance metrics, your income, race, ethnicity, household information that might be appropriate based on the type of grant and type of program you're running. Make sure you and your partners are collecting the appropriate demographic and outcome measures so that you can populate this report properly. Next slide, please. And here's just a quick screenshot of how when you hit edit next to these performance metrics, the window will open up and these cells will become fillable. So again, just keep in mind that you really want to hit save every time. Make sure you're saving your work as you transition from screen to screen. Again, I'll point out that this is where you'll report the Section 3 labor hours. Again, June 21st, there's a particular webinar on Section 3, but this is where they'll be reported in your semi-annual reports at the activity level. Next slide, please. I want to give you just a quick review of the data analytics or reports module. Using that pie chart icon at the top, you can go to data analytics and then reports. You'll use along the sort of the screenshot of the back here, the shared reports. And then you'll be able to look at various admin, financial, and performance reports. We're just showing you a highlight of some of the admin reports here. So there's additional guidance on this in the DRGR user manual that we provide a link to. So I'd encourage you to review that manual, learn a little bit more about each of these reports and how they might be helpful for you. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick screenshot of some of the global finance, as they're called, but financial reports. We're highlighting here on the bottom right some of the cumulative or grant level reports that could be helpful as you progress from into many months and perhaps multiple years into your grant program. Might be helpful to run those reports to see financial transactions from the onset. Next slide, please. And then here's a screenshot of sampling of the performance reports. Again, the PR42, it just says an example here showing you cumulative grant totals for performance measures sorted by responsible organizations and activity types. Next slide, please. Once you've viewed each of those reports, and here's just a screenshot of that, you're able to export via Excel or PDF. We've just highlighted here the options for Excel with or without formatting as an Excel or a CSV file. You've got a few options here. And then on the PDF export to the right, you can manipulate scaling it to one page or multiple pages, portrait and landscape mode, etc. You can print with cover page or without cover page, etc. So there's a lot of functionality here, and I'm sure you all will poke around and become familiar with those. But just want to give you a quick screenshot here so you can see the functionality. Next slide, please. So again, the Section 3 identification and annual Section 3 reporting, there will be a webinar on that on June 21st specifically. I'll provide a link to where you can register, but I believe obviously you've registered for today, so perhaps you are familiar with that registration link and are already signed up. But I would really encourage you. This is probably very new to most of our CPF grantees, so I encourage you to register for that webinar as well. Next slide, please. So to conclude, I'm just going to share with you several resources, links. Again, this webinar will be posted, the full recording, the slides and transcript will be made available on the HUD Exchange, and as well as some of these other resources. Next slide, please. Of course, if you haven't already, make sure you have your particular grant guide, whether it's your FY22 or 23 guide. Those are both actually on the HUD.gov sites for the CPF grants, and should be on the HUD Exchange. If they're not already, they should be there momentarily as well. Next slide, please. This is a relatively new addition to the HUD Exchange. You've heard me mention it multiple times now, but there is a specific community project funding web page off of the HUD Exchange. So you can go to hudexchange.info. You can use the programs icon at the top to search for the CPF grants, and it'll pull you to all the available resources. So moving forward, all of the trainings, the guides, updates to DRGR systems, etc., they're all going to be posted here on this one-stop shop, if you will. Next slide. You can also subscribe to HUD Exchange mailing list, and so you can access specifically and get signed up for the listserv for the CPF project. So just pointing that to your attention. You may want to create an account on the HUD Exchange and then set yourself up for email updates on the listserv. Next slide. On that HUD Exchange website directly for CPF, there is specific pages taking you to the DRGR login page. If you weren't able to write that login down, but just to confirm that you're actually accessing the correct link, you can go through the HUD Exchange and find that DRGR page and get right to the correct login screen. Next slide, please. All kinds of details here, both the trainings for the CPF particular program, but also just user guides and manuals on the DRGR system overall. Keep in mind as you're using these guides and reviewing these tools on DRGR that this is a program that is used by many other types of grants and grantees, specifically as the name implies, disaster grants after hurricanes and floods and fires. So not everything is directly applicable to CPF, but all of the functionality, the reports module, details, etc., all of that applies to everyone. But some of the particular requirements may be unique for you or CPF grantees. Next slide, please. Also, if you need additional questions or technical assistance for your particular grant, whether it's DRGR or anything else, you now have the ability to submit and ask a question specific for CPF grantees through the HUD Exchange. You can do that through the program support menu and submit and ask a question, or you can request in-depth assistance if you feel like just a simple AAQ type responses is not sufficient. Next slide, please. We currently have 2 more webinars scheduled for this summer. Again, I mentioned the June 21st, Section 3, And then I'll be back with you on July 12th for reporting details. We'll dive more into both the semi-annual reports as well as the report module and prepping for a grant closeout. All of these remaining two are at 1 o'clock Eastern, running to 2:15, and you can register again on the HUD Exchange CPF particular page. Next slide, please. So I want to thank you for attending today. This last slide just takes you to the variety of links throughout the HUD Exchange as well as HUD.gov pages where the CPF information originated. Keep your eye out for additional trainings and technical assistance options. There's going to be a lot of online guides, how-to videos, and YouTube-style short videos posted to the HUD Exchange throughout this process. So keep your eyes out. And again, I encourage you all to register for the email listserv. And with that, we will conclude our presentation. Thank you and have a great day.
I'm just going to jump in with one quick correction. If you have registered for today's webinar, you are registered for both the June 21st and July 12th webinars, and the join links should have been sent to you with the confirmation of your registration, so you do not need to register again. We do hope to see you at the next webinar on June 21st, and thank you for attending today.
Thank you, Julie.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.